Judge Whitaker thought he was sentencing a clueless teen until the defendant started dismantling the case like a seasoned lawyer. The atmosphere inside the Fulton County Courthouse in Georgia felt dense, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every seat in the gallery was taken, and quiet whispers echoed, as spectators leaned in to witness what was unfolding. At the defense table stood a young man who looked almost out of place, hands resting casually in his jacket pockets, his posture calm but assertive. His name was Malik Turner, 20 years old, charged with vehicle theft and resisting law enforcement. The allegations were serious, but the expression on Judge Ronald Whitaker's face suggested that what was really on trial wasn't just the law, it was Malik himself. Whitaker reclined in his chair, fingers tapping with calculated rhythm on the edge of the bench. He eyed Malik over the top of his glasses with an expression that hovered between condescension and amusement. "Think you're some kind of courtroom genius?" he asked, his tone laced with dry sarcasm. "This isn't some high school debate, son." A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. The clerk grinned. The bailiff smirked. Even the prosecutor looked mildly entertained. Malik didn't blink. He wasn't playing their game. He had been preparing for this his entire life, not for this specific moment, but for the courtroom itself. While other kids memorized football scores, he studied legal precedent. While his peers spent hours on video games, he practiced trial arguments alone in his room, analyzing real cases he'd read online. His mother, Tanya Turner, had worked as a legal assistant for over 2 decades. Malik had grown up hearing about shady deals, biased rulings, and defense lawyers who gave up before the fight even started. He absorbed every story like scripture. By 15, he could dissect court proceedings better than most third-year law students. But none of that meant a thing to Whitaker. To him, Malik was just another statistic. "Let's move this along," the judge muttered, opening the file in front of him. "I've got a dinner reservation at 6. Another round of laughter rose, but something shifted in that moment. Malik allowed himself the smallest smirk, because Whitaker had already fumbled, and no one else seemed to notice yet. The prosecutor, Thomas Radcliffe, stood with the easy swagger of someone who had already mentally celebrated the verdict. His suit looked tailored, his posture rehearsed, and his voice had the polish of someone who had delivered this exact argument dozens of times before. "Your Honor, the state intends to demonstrate without a shred of doubt that the defendant, Malik Turner, was found in direct possession of a stolen vehicle, a 2021 BMW 5 Series, reported missing earlier that same afternoon. Law enforcement pursued him through the heart of Atlanta, where he allegedly attempted to evade capture before being taken into custody. His fingerprints were located on the steering wheel. The prosecution believes the evidence is more than sufficient." The words echoed with force, drawing murmurs from the gallery. On the surface it seemed airtight. A stolen luxury car, a chase, an arrest. Judge Whitaker glanced briefly at Malik over his glasses, then shifted his attention back to the man speaking. "Proceed," he said flatly. Assistant District Attorney Thomas Radcliffe stepped forward with practiced ease, his footsteps clicking in deliberate rhythm against the courtroom floor. "The defense might attempt to frame this as some sort of misunderstanding," he said, gesturing toward Malik without looking directly at him. "They may argue that Mr. Turner is just a victim of poor timing or mistaken identity." Then suddenly he pivoted and locked eyes with Malik for the first time. "But let's be honest here. What kind of innocent man flees from police?" The weight of his words hung in the air. The tension was unmistakable. Judge Whitaker leaned forward, fingers steepled under his chin. Malik didn't so much as blink. Radcliffe continued, flipping neatly through a sheaf of documents. "Your Honor, I have in hand the sworn testimony of Officer Miguel Santos, who states he personally witnessed the defendant operating the vehicle just moments before the pursuit began. The vehicle was confirmed as stolen, and the arrest followed proper protocol." Whitaker gave a slow exhale through his nose and nodded slightly. "Sounds pretty straightforward to me." And to most people in the room, it probably did. The facts sounded clean and irrefutable. Stolen car, a foot chase, a by-the-book arrest. But Malik had spent far too much of his life studying courtrooms to not recognize the fractures beneath the surface. Still, he stayed quiet, observing, waiting for his moment. Judge Whitaker tapped his gavel once, more for rhythm than order. "Defense?" he said, glancing toward the far table. The public defender, a woman named Erica Monroe, rose with visible hesitation. She had barely spoken since walking into the room. "Your Honor, my client," she began softly, but then paused as Malik touched her arm gently. It was a wordless message. She hesitated a second longer, then returned to her seat. Malik stepped forward. "I'll be speaking on my own behalf, Your Honor." The courtroom fell still. It was as if every breath had been collectively held. Whitaker raised an eyebrow, his expression a blend of curiosity and barely concealed amusement. "You'll what?" Malik's voice was clear and composed. "I'll be representing myself." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. The bailiff's brows lifted. Radcliffe's confident smirk faltered for the briefest moment before he let out a quick, mocking chuckle. "Well, this should be fun." But no one was laughing when Malik took his first step forward, because everything in that courtroom was about to shift. The weight of the moment wrapped around him as he repositioned himself at the center, hands still casually tucked into his pockets. He let the silence linger, long enough to make people fidget in their seats. Then, with deliberate calm, he began. "Your Honor, before I proceed, I'd like to clarify something with the prosecution." Radcliffe folded his arms, raising an eyebrow. "Go ahead." Malik stepped forward slowly. "You stated that Officer Miguel Santos personally observed me behind the wheel prior to my arrest, correct?" Radcliffe let out a sharp breath, already sounding dismissive. "That's correct." "And that statement is part of his official report?" "Obviously." Malik nodded, then turned his focus to Judge Whitaker. "Your Honor, I move to have that testimony excluded from the record." Whitaker narrowed his eyes. "On what grounds?" For the first time, Malik removed his hands from his pockets and motioned toward the prosecution's table. "Because Officer Santos didn't see me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even on duty at the time the pursuit began." A flash of uncertainty flickered across Radcliffe's face. "What exactly are you implying?" Malik stepped closer, calm as ever. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to request access to Officer Santos's GPS logs for that evening. If his report claims he witnessed me driving the vehicle, the GPS data should place him at the scene. But..." He let the word hover. "I have strong reason to believe it won't." The gallery stirred with growing interest. Judge Whitaker's brow furrowed, his gaze drifting toward the prosecutor. Radcliffe cleared his throat, jaw clenched. "That report was filed by a law enforcement officer, Your Honor. Are we seriously going to pit his word against a defendant's speculation?" Malik gave a light, indifferent shrug. "If the officer was where he said he was, the data will back him up. But if not..." He let the silence say the rest. Whitaker studied Malik for a moment that felt stretched thin with tension. Then he turned to the prosecutor. "Does the state have any objection to producing the officer's GPS records?" Radcliffe hesitated. It was only a few seconds, but it was enough. The jurors saw it. The people in the gallery saw it. And most importantly, so did the judge. Malik drew in a quiet breath. He had spent years watching courtroom footage, studying prosecutors, learning their tricks, how they bent the narrative, leaned on theatrics, and played the system to win. And one thing he had learned with absolute certainty: when a prosecutor starts stalling, it's because their confidence is starting to crack. Judge Whitaker let out a sigh and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Counselor?" Radcliffe finally gave a tight shake of his head. "No objections, Your Honor." But the shift in the room had already taken hold. The smirks were gone. The laughter had vanished. What remained was silence, tense and heavy. Radcliffe straightened his papers, his composure slipping just slightly at the edges. "Your Honor, while we await confirmation of the GPS data, the fact remains that the defendant's fingerprints were recovered from the steering wheel of the stolen BMW." Malik gave a slow nod, his face unreadable. "That's correct." He stepped forward again. "But let's take a moment to examine that evidence." Whitaker raised an eyebrow but gestured for him to continue. Malik turned toward the jury box, deliberately locking eyes with each juror. The prosecution wants you to believe that my fingerprints on a car automatically means I stole it. That's the story they're offering. But let's think about this like rational people. He paused, letting the silence build. Imagine walking into a clothing store. You try on a coat. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up. Then you return it to the rack and leave. Later that day, someone walks out with that same coat without paying. Are you the thief, just because your prints were on it? A few jurors exchanged looks. One person in the gallery whispered something to the person beside them. Malik didn't slow down. The car in question was sitting outside a convenience store several hours before the so-called theft took place. I was inside that store with 3 friends. When we came out, I leaned against the car. I even opened the door. It was already unlocked. I didn't drive it. I didn't take anything. It was a stupid, impulsive moment. Nothing more. He let that settle in the air before slicing through the stillness with a quiet, pointed question. Does touching something make you a criminal? Radcliffe shifted uncomfortably, flipping through his notes in an effort to reclaim control. But Malik wasn't done. And while we're talking about that fingerprint evidence, he said, turning back to Judge Whitaker, was the forensic technician in charge of analyzing those prints ever subpoenaed to appear in court for testimony? Judge Whitaker blinked, momentarily thrown off by the question. He looked to Radcliffe. The prosecutor hesitated before finally conceding, no. Malik pressed his lips together, then tilted his head slightly. So let me get this straight, he said, his tone even but unmistakably pointed. The prosecution is relying on forensic evidence to try and convict me, yet they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the actual analyst who processed that evidence? No cross-examination, no questions about chain of custody, no way to verify the reliability of the procedure? Radcliffe's jaw clenched. Malik nodded slowly, as if that confirmed everything he already knew. Fascinating. Judge Whitaker let out a low sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose. It was the expression of a man realizing this case was no longer the open and shut matter he had expected. But Malik wasn't finished. What came next would tilt the entire courtroom. He stepped forward, voice calm but unwavering. Your Honor, I'd like to submit into evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle in question. Whitaker's brows drew together. The owner? Yes, Malik said with a nod. Mr. Leonard Pace, the registered owner of the BMW. He gave a statement to the responding officers the night the vehicle was reported stolen. For reasons I can only guess, it was never included in the prosecution's evidence packet. He turned toward Radcliffe. Do you remember what Mr. Pace told the police that night? The prosecutor stiffened. He knew exactly what was coming. Malik didn't wait for a reply. He removed a document from his folder and read it aloud. I left my car running when I dashed into the convenience store. Somebody must have jumped in and drove off. But it wasn't the person they arrested. The kid I saw was white. A ripple of shock moved through the gallery. Malik held the document up for all to see. That's straight from the original police report. Funny how that part never made it into the courtroom. He faced Judge Whitaker again. The arresting officer left it out of his testimony. The prosecution ignored it, and yet they're asking this jury to convict me, someone who doesn't even match the description of the actual suspect, beyond a reasonable doubt. Radcliffe stepped forward, scrambling for control. Your Honor, that statement is immaterial. The defendant was found in connection with the stolen vehicle. But Malik shook his head. No, I wasn't. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It sliced through the tension like a blade. I was taken into custody 3 blocks away, walking home after picking up snacks with 2 friends. The vehicle was already abandoned. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't near the car. I wasn't running from anything. Malik's voice was steady, each word hitting with precision. The only thing connecting me to this case is lazy assumptions and flawed police work. Judge Whitaker released a slow, tired breath and rubbed his temple. The case was falling apart, and everyone in that courtroom could feel it. Malik turned back to face the jury. The real suspect got away that night, but the officers saw a black kid walking nearby and figured that was close enough. That's what this trial has really been about. A heavy silence followed. Judge Whittaker cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and looked toward the prosecution table. "Does the state wish to proceed?" Radcliffe's shoulders were rigid, his face visibly flushed. "No, Your Honor." Whittaker sat back, exhaled again, and studied Malik for a long, quiet moment before shifting his gaze to the jury box. Then he leaned forward and delivered the words that would echo in that room long after the gavel fell. "Case dismissed." For a heartbeat, everything stood still. Then the room erupted. Half the gallery jumped to their feet, some in disbelief, others exhaling in quiet vindication. Reporters scribbled frantically. Camera shutters snapped like machine gun fire. Through it all, Malik stood motionless. He didn't rush. He let the moment breathe, let the reality settle around the room like dust after a storm. Judge Whittaker, still gripping his gavel, looked at Malik with something new in his eyes. Not just surprise, something closer to recognition, maybe even remorse. Malik met his gaze briefly before turning toward the exit. But just as he reached the double doors, the judge's voice called out, "Mr. Turner?" Malik paused, but didn't turn around. Whittaker hesitated, then finally said, "You should think about law school." Malik allowed himself a small smirk. He didn't need to think about it. He'd already made up his mind. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with voices and flashing lights. Reporters filled the steps, cameras pointed, microphones shoved toward him like bayonets. "Malik, did you expect the judge to dismiss the case? What's your next move? How does it feel to outsmart a veteran prosecutor?" Malik pulled the hood of his sweatshirt over his head and walked straight past them. He wasn't there for headlines. This was never about proving how clever he was. It was always about something greater. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, his mother, Tanya, waited. Arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She didn't rush to him. She just looked, her eyes scanning his face. Then, after a long pause, she let out the breath she'd clearly been holding. "You nearly gave me a heart attack, boy." Malik scratched the back of his neck and chuckled. "Had to take a shot, Ma." She stared at him for another second, then pulled him into a firm, wordless hug. "You've always been the stubborn one," Tanya muttered, her voice half exasperation, half pride. The cameras were still flashing, reporters still shouting questions, but Malik wasn't focused on any of that. Across the street, leaning against a black sedan, Judge Whittaker stood silently. His posture had changed. No more aloofness, no more condescension. His face no longer carried that detached smirk. Instead, it held something heavier. Reflection. He had expected this to be another routine hearing, another young man, another charge, another guilty plea. But now he realized he'd remember this one, because Malik had done something most people never get the chance or the courage to do. He forced the system to confront itself, and for once, it blinked. There's a lesson in that, one we can't ignore. How many other cases ended just like this one almost did? How many lives were derailed not by facts, but by bias, by shortcuts, by a justice system more concerned with closure than truth? Malik had the tools to push back, but what about all the others who didn't? This wasn't just one victory. This was a glimpse into a larger fight. Malik already knew what came next. That courtroom wouldn't be the last one he stood in, but the next time, he wouldn't be sitting at the defendant's table. He'd be the one standing to defend. And when that day came, he wouldn't be alone. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, then don't let it end here. Share it. Because the justice system may be built on laws, but it's run by people. And people don't change unless we make them. Hit the like button. Subscribe for more stories that challenge the way we see the world, and keep the conversation going. Because next time, it might not be Malik. It might be someone you love.